This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I'm your host, Mike Rapin. Joining me for episode 356, Two Children Lost in the Snow, Nick White.
Hey.
And Kait Lamphere.
I'm just out here making snow angels.
Oh boy. Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about winter and all of the cold things that are happening here in this month of January. But before we get into things, I want to remind everyone that next week's episode is the IRCB annual, the 8th annual for this show. I can't believe that I'm saying that out loud. Get your asses ready. It's going to be a wild ride. It's going to be me and Danny and Paul and Kait, and we're going to be recording and broadcasting the episode live on YouTube and Twitch, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on January 22nd. Do not miss it. We usually record these episodes on Sundays in the afternoon. This time, we're recording on Sunday at 8 p.m. It's going to be insane. Show up on YouTube, show up on Twitch. There'll be links in the show notes for this. Make sure you're subscribed so that you get notifications and reminders and all that stuff. But I'm going to be putting up a challenge. Which is the better audience, YouTube or Twitch? We'll find out on Sunday. But anyways, make sure to email us some stuff if you want it read live on the show within some reason. Comic recommendations, reviews, things you want to shout out about what you thought of the last year of IRCB, anything, your thoughts on the X-Men. I'd love to yell and scream at you about that. ircbpodcast@gmail.com. And one last announcement, the 2023 Reading Challenge starts in February, so get ready for that. And if you're a $5 or higher patron, make sure that you send in your recommendation, the book that you want to put on that list, because I sent you a message you should have gotten, and make sure you reply to me about that. But let's get into things. We're here to talk about comic books. So I have two legally mandated questions to ask you, and that is, how have you been? How have comic books been? Let's start with you, Nick.
Things have been good. If not a little weird. No snow. Haven't had snow for a while.
Right.
All that blizzard snow probably went away like within a week. So, it's just that perpetual state of fickleness in Michigan where there's either no snow and you're upset about that, or there's just too much snow and you just don't want it. So, just true to the human, nature of eternal fickleness.
Right.
I did want to point out that Mike forgot to mention earlier that he will be giving away a PS5 as part of.
Nick, hold on. The one thing that I did actually forget to mention is that we have a listener survey, but I'll talk about that when I talk about my books.
And a new Chevy Bolt. Mike's giving away a new Chevy.
Nick, pick one or the other. One is actually believable. The other is not. Okay.
The other is a PS5.
You, the listener. You, the listener, decide which is the most believable.
Mike's going to take a picture of one of those Carvana towers, and you just blindfold you, and you throw a dart at it, and whichever car it lands on, that's yours.
Sure.
Okay, there we go. Glad we got that sorted. It's going to be great. And there won't be any litigation following it from these claims. No. Beyond that, in terms of what I've read, one book that I do want to talk about is Spy Supreme. Oh my goodness, I'm getting all my spy books wrong here. This is Spy Superb #1, written, art, letters, all by Matt Kindt. It's a very Matt Kindt operation, with colors by his wife Charlene Kindt. For those unaware, this is the creative team that brought you Department H, also at Dark Horse, that ran from 2016 to 2018. But the team is returning, this time under Kindt's Flux House imprint, which was announced last July and launched its first series, Mind Management Bootleg, during the same month. What's kind of interesting about Flux House is that, to my knowledge, they've only done 2 books since it launched, and both books, Mind Management Reboot and Spy Superb, are basically Kindt revisiting probably his 2 best known kind of like indie creator series. Although, Mind Management really wasn't indie. It was at Dark Horse. It just looked indie, right? Matt Kindt's art always sort of feels like it has an indie aesthetic. Matt, I love your work. I'm not backpedaling here, I swear. But it's just interesting that he's sort of going back and revisiting these, and the products that he's creating now, they're not really prequels. They're not really sequels. They're not really reboots. Both of these 2 new series kind of exist within the canon of the old franchise, but there's enough time and distance between the original franchises and the new ones that it's just a good jumping on point. And as someone who didn't manage to finish either of those 2 original series, I can tell you it's a good jumping on point because I haven't gone back.
That I was gonna say that was the one question that I had about these, because I always feel like I can't try more Matt Kint stuff until I read all of Mind Management. Like, that's just a rule that I have in my head. But to know that these are not connected is actually a good thing, or at least slightly independent enough to that you don't have to finish the previous like Mind Management or Super Spy runs.
Exactly. Like, without getting into it too much, there are like a big large scale there's a large scale event that happens at the end of Mind Management, and that sort of sets up the setting for Mind Management bootleg, but it's been a couple decades. Anyway, like I said, it's both are really approachable, and I think there's more editorial control, and I feel like Kint is a little more, it's hard to explain. Like, I love Matt Kint, but he is one of those writers where I feel like a little editorial control goes a long way. Like,
Sure, sure.
if you leave some of, Matt Kint in an echo chamber, and it just some of it just gets a little out there. But
Gotcha.
in terms of the premise of Spy Superb, without giving too much away, he says before getting into a long treatise, and I really don't want to reveal too much of this, but I do think it's really great. A secret agency has basically developed the perfect spy by recruiting civilians that don't even know that they're spies. So they're just going through their everyday life and going to work or going to the park, and they're inadvertently completing missions without even knowing that they're on one.
God, this,
Um,
this this sounds like the ideal job. I wish that I could just go about my day and then it turns out that I did something. Like, that'd be great.
yeah, and you might say, well, how does that work? Well, there are some mechanisms in place, and you'll just have to read the book to figure out that part. But meanwhile, like, all of these rival nations and corporations and factions, they think that the spy superb is actually an individual. They think it's actually one amazing spy doing all of this, when really it's civilians, which
Sure.
works perfectly, because like you have people who can't betray anyone, and they can't give anything away because they don't even know that they're a spy, right?
Right, right.
So it's the perfect plan, and it works for a long time until the most recent spy ends up dead before making this data pickup, and the data pickup contains the list of all past and future spies.
Of course.
Of
Of
course it
course.
does, of course. So anyway, the agency moves on to this new guy named J. Bartholomew III, as their quote most our next like most useful idiot. And the quote for Jay at the beginning is that Jay is, quote, making the final push towards finishing my new novel. Yup, he's that kind of guy. Uh,
Okay.
Jay, like, yaks the barista's ear off about how genius his book is, but then he won't leave a tip. He describes his work to a friend as Proustian, but then admits that he hasn't actually read any Proust. Um, he says that the biggest
Okay.
concern about his book is that its layered meanings are such that it will be overlooked in my lifetime. Yes, Jay is one of those kind of guys.
Mhm.
And it's Matt Kint sort of got at this in an interview he did with Hollywood Reporter. He says, in Spy Superb, I wanted to explore a character, the idea of a very average person who is under the belief that he is utterly exceptional. He told the Hollywood Reporter. He says there's a scientific term for this, the Dunning-Kruger effect. A person who insists that they possess knowledge and skills that they obviously do not. What if a super spy was suffering from this? Uh, well, of course, they would be, a spy superb. So it's almost like if you've seen the Pink Panther movies, or if you've seen Inspector Gadget, right, where
Sure.
he's like inadvertently dispatching everyone, but he's definitely not trying to do it. Like,
Mhm.
he's like looking into his fridge to, see what to eat, and as he swings the fridge door open, there's like an assassin hiding in his house, and the fridge door smashes the guy in the face, and he like
Right.
gets
Mr.
knocked
Magoo.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Mr. Magoo would be another great example. So I mean, it's really really funny. This guy is like so obsessed with like his novel, and that he's like this genius, and like all of these assassins are like trying to murder him, and inadvertently, like I said, like it's still working out in his favor, and you're still thinking like, well, how is this happening? Like, how is this working out exactly the way it does? And again, like, there are mechanisms at play here that you just got to read the book, because there's sort of in a Matt Kint corporation's tinfoil hat, like, uh, sort of way, like, it's semi-grounded in weirdly, and
Sure.
I just had a lot of fun with it.
I'm glad when you told me that this came out and you were like, this was a great read. I was like, this is the Matt Kint effect. This is Nick. There's like a bias here, right? Already with Matt Kint books. But your description here is selling me on actually picking this up. Now, I did make a rule for myself, as I told you before, that I'm only picking up Matt Kint books in trades now, because I can't do the month to month with him like I did it with Department H, and I love that book, but boy was it way better on the reread in the collections, because it hits like that 24-hour cycle, 24 issues is so much better executed in a graphic novel format. So either way, I'll probably wait on this, but it sounds like it's a fun romp. So that's good to hear. Really good to hear.
Yeah, like, they sort of struck a compromise. I think, obviously, I'm sure Kint would have preferred to have this released as an original graphic novel.
Sure.
But instead it's releasing as a trio of oversized issues. So it's like
Interesting.
a 50-page issue, a 50-page issue, a 50-page issue.
Would you say that justifies the $8 cover cost? Because I saw that at the shop and I was going to pick it up because it's a number one. Okay.
Yeah. That is why the issues are expensive, is that they're like, it's like a 56-page issue.
You didn't answer my question though.
Is it worth it?
Is it worth it? Is it worth $8? Okay. I mean, would I argue against a 170-page graphic novel being $24? Probably not. I'd probably hope for the $20 range, but like, I get it. That's a bigger discussion beyond what we're saying here. How about this, Kait? How have you been? How have comics books been? We're gonna move on before Nick and I get into a deep, dark debate about this.
I've been good. New year, new reading challenge, new reading goal. I have a lot of work to do regarding my reading now. And I started.
Wait. Have you set yourself up for failure? Are these attainable goals, Kait? That's the better question.
Unknown.
Are we talking about the reading challenge, or is this just getting really personal now, because it feels like
I read In by Will McPhail. I actually checked this out back in early December. I read it in early December, and I've been waiting impatiently to talk about it. So here we are. I apologize to all of the people at the library that haven't gotten to read this in the meantime, because I wanted to revisit it before I talked about it. It'll be back tomorrow. Anyway, In follows the story of a writer who works like from various coffee shops, goes around and writes at coffee shops, and he helps his mom to paint this townhouse. And most of this story is actually about how he feels like he's always performing for other people, and most of that performance is like the role of like a sad quiet guy, or like doing small talk, and he feels like he's not connecting with people. So he tries to have conversations that are like real connection. And when he does manage this, we don't see the conversation that's happening. We don't know what's being talked about, but we see the feeling of that connection. Like the art goes from like this black and white, like set in the city story, to being multiple pages of full color art that like have its own story within those pages. So for example, the first time we see this, what we see is like this beautiful mountainscape, and the main character is there, and he's exploring with this like look of wonder and awe on his face, and it's just really stunning, and like you understand the feeling that he's getting from having a connection with another person. And I can't really say that this story ends happily, but it was satisfying. I don't know how to say that any other way. But sometimes I feel like you read a book, and it feels like it contains more like internal meaning than other media. And this book, and by Will McPhail, feels like one of those stories. And it was definitely worth revisiting a month after I read it. And like, while the story is really good and the art is really beautiful, my favorite detail of this book is the name of these bars and these coffee shops that the main character goes to. So for example, there's the Your Friends Have Kids bar, or the tired corduroy coffee. And then there's this bar that he goes to multiple times, and the font on the sign keeps changing, and the characters actually comment about it. They're like, "Oh, it's Helvetica today." Uh, as a graphic designer, this was a joke for me, and I
I was
loved
gonna
it.
say that's like bullseye Kait territory there. I'm
Yes.
sure. Yeah.
And I've seen like little comics by Will McPhail online. I must follow him on Instagram, or maybe they just pop up on my Pinterest or something. And so this was actually, I didn't even make the connection. This was the same creator when I grabbed this book out of the library. I was just like, oversized hardcover. It's got some nice art. Cool, I'm in. Know nothing else about it. And it was
Kate,
definitely worth it.
You're the ideal like library shopper.
Yeah.
I think like that is what I think every librarian wants to hear is like, oh, this looks good, and then you just took it home.
Done.
There's no deep dive. I love it. That's amazing. I have so much to say about this book, Kate. I have so much to say about this book. I can't even get into it because it's in the best of 2022 episode that's coming out at the end of this month. I wrote so many notes. I just can't wait to talk about it, but I'm going to save it. I got to save it.
Okay, that's going to be on Patreon, right?
Yes, that's going to be on our Patreon. Kate,
nice pivot,
I will
Kate.
say I loved I love this book. Like everybody gave me some really good books for the best of 2022 episode that I'm recording. This book by far, I like finished it and I started messaging Kate and I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Like spoilers, I really love this book. I have so much to say about it. It's just such a fantastic comic book. Oh my gosh.
Good. I'm really glad that you liked it. I do want to say I do have a content warning for this book, and you do see some nudity. So just heads up.
Yeah. But Will McPhail, oh man, the way that this guy draws faces and expressions, I can't get enough of it. I can't get enough of it. Cool. Well, I'm gonna step in here. I've been very busy. I've been reading a bunch of our best of 2022 books, but I've also been like rearranging a lot of comics. Like I spent all day yesterday bagging and boarding probably all of the comic books, single issue comics that I bought since I moved into my new house, which is not a lot, but it still was enough for me to go, oh, damn, I need to buy 2 more short boxes. One for the overflow and one for when I eventually overflow into the next, book. But I realized that I was missing some issues, which is always a frustrating thing when you set up a pull list at a comic shop and then they don't pull the books for you. And of course, I'm not keeping track of any of this because I'm just buying the books and bringing them home and I'm not reading them because who does that? Who buys books and then reads them, right? So yeah, I had to do some very deep eBay searching and paid way too much money for shipping on some single issue comics that I'm missing because I went to 2 comic shops yesterday just to go find some of these missing issues and couldn't find them, as well as some trades that I'm missing just because of I didn't buy them when they came out, which is a fool's mistake on my part. You'll never be able to get me to stop buying Rogue and Gambit comic books. But anyways, let me talk about a book that I did read, which is Bird King Volume 1. This is written by Daniel Friedman with art by Crom. I do want to say Nick reminded me that this book came out because it was on sale like digitally, and I've been waiting anxiously for this book. I think it was the pick of my top of my pile last week, so I was very excited to dig into it. But yeah, the art from this book drew me in. Crom's Instagram is someone I've been following for a really long time. I just like the way that this person draws stuff, and then it turns out they had a book coming out, which is really cool. This is a pretty solid read from beginning to end. It's dark fantasy. It's kind of grim. There are these. The basics, the premise of this story is that there was once a series of great Titan type characters that existed to fight back evils of the world, and they have all disappeared from the world that this story takes place in. And suddenly one of them comes back to life after a series of happenstances in the comic. I don't want to spoil it because it's really fun, but really I can't express how much Crom's art really sells this whole book. I think if you like the style of Mike Mignola, if you like kind of like a more jagged, almost like cartoony style, you'll really dig this. It's like big, bold strokes, creating these larger than life enemies with rich colors that put emotion into every page. Stylistic choices to like show the difference between like regular people and like these amalgam like monstrosity people is really cool, really terrifying. They do a really good job of using shadow and blacks to like hide things and create this sense of terror within throughout the story. And all it comes down to at the end of this is I just want a Bird King tattoo. Like the way that Crom draws skulls is like exactly the type of thing that I want on my body. Like I've got this Picasso skull that's on my arm, and I want to get a Mike Mignola skull, and I think I want to get a skull that's like of this guy Crom because it's all in the same vein of these like weird, jaggedy, very simple, like simply shaped things, but like beautiful at the same time. Yeah, this book is really fun. If you like dark fantasy, if you want to see like the beginnings of a story of someone basically taking a hero's journey or riding on a hero's journey, if you like something like Step by Bloody Step, I think you'd like this book as well. And yeah, I highly recommend it. It's a beautiful book. It's short, it's sweet, and it gets right to the point from the get-go. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I believe that is part of Dark Horse's um, fantasy sale on Comixology, which
Yeah.
goes through January 30th. So for anyone who thinks that sounds interesting, it's available for just $4 or $5 right now.
Yeah.
So, and again, I know I talk about this and then proceed to do it anyway. But even though artists don't like being compared to artists, I think there's definitely some sort of a comparison to be made here with Mike Mignola, and I think
Yeah.
any artist would probably not complain about Mike Mignola comparisons, and just the fiery skulls and the big oversized hulking armor, and it's just yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
If you like Hellboy and you're looking for something Hellboy adjacent to tide you over, I think this would do it.
Totally agree. Nick, what's another book you read?
So the other book I want to talk about is, well, it says Dead Season. I don't know why. I think Google auto-corrected or something. I think that's supposed to be Dead Seas. Dead Seas by Cavan Scott. Art by Nick Brokenshire and letters by Sean Lee. And this is one of the IDW original comics. Back in April of 2022, IDW announced that they were going to be launching 9 original series, and they started launching them last July.
Mm-hmm.
With the intent, and I don't know how I feel about this, except it feels a little gross, but the press release was like, after we release these titles, we are going to use the IDW Media Corporation to market these titles towards movies and TV shows. And I'm like, maybe that's the part you just don't say out loud. Like, we can all sort of think to ourselves that maybe you're going to IP mine this, but you don't need to say it. Like,
Sure.
that's okay. You can just keep that part to yourself. Use your inside voice.
Right.
But this 6-issue miniseries has a real pulpy 70s B-movie feel, both narratively and aesthetically. And it's first off, it's just nice to see Cavan Scott and IDW both making sort of original content, and like, that's not a knock against franchise books. I love franchise books. There's plenty of quality franchise books, and both IDW and Dark Horse have done a fine job with both. If you're familiar with Cavan Scott or not, you're probably at least seen his name on any of the Star Wars High Republic books or the Star Wars Adventure books.
I mean, or that time he guested on this show and I had a nice little interview with him.
Yeah,
that too.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Listen, I'm really fucking cool, Nick. All right, and the fact that you won't admit it is pretty offensive right here and now on the
show. Maybe I did this little interview. You've probably never heard of it. On this show you've probably never heard of.
Yeah.
With these panelists that you've probably never heard of. Yeah. So the premise is pretty high concept. You have a band of criminals that get flown out to this freighter like 2 miles off the coast. And they exist in this, take on our world where the spirits of the dead have started returning like 10 years ago. And of course, the question becomes, how can we monetize this? How can we monetize this spiritual, this infestation of spirits? And this company called Barico Industries figures out how to trap and eliminate them. And yes, that does sound like Ghostbusters. But then they go, maybe we can actually monetize this even further. And so they figure out that these spirits, produce ectoplasm. And of course, they discover that ectoplasm has medical uses and it has like weapon uses, et cetera, et cetera. And so they start mining these spirits for ectoplasm. But of course, it's a very, very dangerous thing to do. And so why not hire people that are criminals that are already in the US penal system and make
Right.
them do it. So that's fair. And our main character, Gus, is one of these criminals, which of course on the flight out, he's got the well-worn picture of his daughter, and someone's like, "Oh, who's that?" And he's like, "It's just my daughter. I gotta get back home," and all of that. And
Mm-hmm.
it really has the trappings of it's like a 70s combination of like the 70s obsession with prison genre films, and then the
Right.
70s 80s obsession with like haunting horror films.
It's
And
it sounds like a demented twist between Con Air and Ghostbusters.
yeah, I mean, and like, God, Nick Brokenshire's art, it like it feels flat and pulpy, and
Mm-hmm.
it just has that perfect tone for that kind of like really old VHS tape that you tell your mom you want to watch Ghostbusters, and she's like, "We have Ghostbusters at home and it's Dead Seas." And it's like
Oh
it's
my god.
it's it's made for like 1/10 the budget of Ghostbusters in like a
Sure.
third of the time, and you find it and you're like, I guess let's watch this. And I
But this is a good thing, right? You're saying this is
Yes,
this is
yeah,
compliments.
it's
Okay, okay.
yeah, I was just about to say, like, I love that. It's like you don't find books like this being made, I think, because people don't realize it's, you know, kind of riffing on that.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, it's original. I think it has something to say without getting too preachy or weighty about, has some things to say about capitalism. It certainly has some things to say about the US penal system,
Mm-hmm.
while at the same time being a wonderfully hacky Ghostbusters ripoff, all the way down to like the backpack proton pack equipment. Basically, it looks like someone was given 2 days to make a proton pack, and it like the backpack looks all right, but the end of it looks like a vacuum attachment on the end. Like it looks like the
Luigi's Mansion, right?
yeah, it really does. Like that, it's great. Anyone who's looking for something just a little different should check this out.
Cool. Very cool. Well, I might have to check this out. I just was skimming through the preview on Amazon, and it looks pretty fun. Looks pretty perfectly described it as like a B movie action thing, and I think that's pretty cool. Real quick before we jump into top of our pile, I did read one other book which is called When I Was Me. This is a book I backed on Kickstarter a little while ago. Came out from Quindry Press, and the story is it's written by a ton of different artists and bunch of different writers, and because it's an anthology of one-page story about like the joyful and euphoric moments of being trans. I thought this was like a really nice book to read overall. Like it really was kind of a palate cleanser from like the action, drama, tragedy, horror, comic world that I'm typically in, and to see a book about people telling their own personal stories about the things where they were able to finally connect with their like inner person and inner self outwardly was really really nice. The foreword of this book spoke about how many of the stories about trans folks tend to be about adversity and trauma, and that this anthology was aimed to showcase the moments where creators felt happiness in who they were and how they expressed themselves. And even as someone like not part of that community, I found this entire anthology from beginning to end to be super uplifting. People expressing their joy is really miraculous, and I think hard to convey in a lot of stories. And the fact that this was like a series of one-page stories, it really focused each individual telling to get out what people were trying to say about themselves. I found it to be really nice to just see how each person experienced joy on their own. And really, I can't really talk about every single story here because I think each of them deserve their own like focus. So I highly recommend everybody go check this out. You can get this at Quindry Press's website. For a couple of bucks, the digital edition. But yeah, it's just a really nice book. If you need something that's like uplifting and just nice to read overall, I think this is a really good like autobio comic that you can sit down and read. So yeah, recommend this. This is When I Was Me. But yeah, let's move on. Let's talk about comics that are on the top of our pile. Comics that are new or old or something that we've just been meaning to get to. So I guess jump back into things. Kait, what's on the top of your pile?
I'm looking forward to Art Brut #2. This is written by W. Maxwell Prince with art by Martin Morazzo and Matt Lopez. And if you've listened to the show for a while, you'll know that I'm not good and keeping on top of current single issue releases, and like I mostly read and trade from the library, usually things that have been out for a while. But I happened to read Art Brut #1 and I loved it. And then I had to wait for #2. Insane. Truly wild. Unacceptable. Art Brut #1 was like part murder mystery and part commentary on art and on classic art. And there were some supernatural things that happened in issue 1 that left me with a whole lot of questions, which made it a great first issue for me, but terrible to have to wait for. And I'm looking forward. So I'm looking forward to reading Art Brut #2. But what's going to happen is that I'm going to get mad that I'm going to have to wait for Art Brut #3. So.
Kait finally experiencing like the month-to-month problem that every comic reader has.
Welcome like, to our single issue thing. It's kind of fucked.
Yeah.
It's like.
Well, I'm glad you read this, Kait. I read the first issue too. I thought it was really, really fun, and I think when I talked about it when it came out, like I was so surprised that like a book like this came out from this creative team, if only because Nick and I have basically made I Read Comic Books into the #1 Ice Cream Man fan podcast. So reading Ice Cream Man and then switching over and reading Art Brut is kind of like, it's like day and night for this team, even though some of the same aesthetics and feelings are there. But Art Brut very much feels like closer to like a superhero or a like almost like a Doom Patrol type comic, whereas Ice Cream Man is, very, very much not that. But I'm glad to see that it wasn't just my bias towards liking W. Maxwell Prince and Martin Morazzo that made me enjoy this book. It's actually a pretty darn good comic book because someone else said that it was.
There was something about this book that reminded me a lot of Ice Cream Man, but I couldn't really put my finger on it, and now I understand. Yeah. Same people. Got it.
Yeah, exactly.
I was going to say, Kait, like if you don't want to wait for the next issue, I think Mike and I have a recommended book that could probably tide you over with a fairly similar aesthetic. And yeah, it's interesting though to think about this book as sort of the precursor to Ice Cream Man as well, because I think some people aren't aware that Art Brut actually predates Ice Cream Man. They're just it's being re-released, and it was like some of the art was slightly remastered, and I guess the whole book was re-lettered apparently.
Wow.
So
I did not know that.
Yeah.
But Nick, what's on the top of your pile?
So for me, I think it's got to be that Texas Blood, Volume 3, with a quick honorable mention for Lost Lad London Volume 3. What a great, weird little manga that book is. But that Texas Blood, written by Chris Condon, art by Jacob Phillips. It feels like it's forever between volumes of this book. And then I looked and I'm like, it has been forever. Volume 2 came out in January of 2022. Volume 1 came out in January of 2021. So it seems like the collected volumes seem to drop every January. And that does mean I'm probably going to have to do a reread of the first 2 volumes. But for a book this good, I can't complain. I think this book sometimes will get overshadowed by Jacob Phillips' work with his dad and Ed Brubaker, and maybe this book doesn't get enough love. And I worry that maybe on some level it's like veering ever slightly into like Lazarus territory, where I bring it up and then no one else says they're reading it, and a couple people go,
Nick,
it's still going, but
me and Paul are both reading this book. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, okay.
We're the only people that matter, okay?
Yeah. I mean, like, my concern is that it's just us 3. Like, that's
right.
But yeah, I mean, if you haven't read this book, I would definitely say go pick up Volume 1. It's a little bit of a Western. It's a little bit of a mystery. There's also some like supernatural elements going on. There's a little bit of everything for everybody here. And Jacob Phillips' art is just, he's really come into his own.
Yeah. I mean, in Phillips's defense, right? In Jacob Phillips's defense, he did also do the book Newburn with Chip Zdarsky, I think, in between this volume. Like that one, that was a 6-issue series, right? So if you're getting a volume of that Texas Blood every year, at least like it's following a good pace, right? Where at least you're like getting a volume regularly compared to sparingly, like I don't know any other examples that I could really spit out here, but like still, at least we're getting it semi regularly. Because
Right.
honestly, if I can alternate between a volume of New Bern and a volume of that Texas Blood, I will be a very happy comic book reader as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see what you're getting at. Certainly, I mean, and this is both the benefit and the benefit of being a creator who works at Image, and the perils of being someone who reads Image books is my book delayed? Is my book canceled? Is my book dead?
Right.
Where is it?
Yeah.
So you're right. If he's delivering on a semi-regular schedule, maybe I shouldn't complain.
Yeah. This could be like I think Bitch Planet is probably the best example of this, where
Oh,
there was
God.
just forever
Right.
amounts of time between issues and volumes, and it's kind of like, is there even any more coming out? And that's unfortunately, I think the book has like, it's not dead in the water, but it's definitely in the water floating. Because Kelly Sue DeConnick said that there may be more coming in the near future, according to her newsletter. But again, it's been years since the last volume of that came out, so. At least we're not in that bucket. And to your point
Right.
about Lazarus, right? Like Lazarus turned into like a quarterly book, right? Because they just wanted a little bit more time to breathe. So yeah, totally different thing. Or Black Magic. Basically anything that's got Greg Rucka's name on it is kind of like up in the air.
Yeah. And Greg is so talented that I just can't be mad.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
you know.
Well, I guess before I get into my pick, I've numbered things in our notes so that I don't miss this. I do want to shout out some folks hanging out with us on Discord this week. They gave us some books that they are reading. Danny is reading Nightwing 100. I didn't know there was 100 issues of Nightwing to even read. That's cool. And Stephanie is reading Volume 3 of Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, which is a book that is on my to-read list for this year. I'm going to get through the saga of Swamp Thing. So I'm looking forward to having that chat with you, Stephanie, on the Discord. But for my pick this week, this is a book I want to shout out Graham, who sent me an email after my call for email recommendations last week. Graham sent me a nice, very long email with a bunch of recommendations, but I picked one to start on, and that is Strontium Dog, Case Files 1, which I grabbed from 2000 AD. This is written by John Wagner and Alan Grant with art by Carlos Esquerra, which, like, let's all step back and realize this is the Judge Dredd team. This is the team that did some of the greatest and biggest Judge Dredd stories that have ever come out. And they did this other story called Strontium Dog. Now, the way that Graham pitched it to me was this. I'm going to read this verbatim. Sorry, Graham. I don't think that this is like anything personal, so whatever. But he says, or they say, excuse me, imagine if you took the mutant metaphor of the X-Men and put it into a sci-fi Western universe where we follow bounty hunters traveling throughout the galaxy and back in time, hunting targets, and imagine it's written with the same style and humor. Most mutants don't have powers like X-Men, but things like feet growing out of their head as Judge Dredd. That's Strontium Dog. Wagner, Grant, and Esquerra, other great 2000 AD characters, and it's almost just as good as Dredd. It's filled with great action, brilliant plot hooks, hilarious characters, great villains, and unlike Dredd, a hero you don't feel bad rooting for. It's also in the same universe as Dredd, but in Dredd's quote possible future, they've met a couple times, which is always fun. I love it because Wagner and Grant are just masters of hooking you with a simple plot, layering it with humor and absurdity, and or cutting social commentary and finishing it with brilliant action scenes drawn by the master Carlos Esquerra. An absolute classic. I will say the pitch is good, right? Like right off the gate, we've got John Wagner, Alan Grant, Carlos Esquerra, like that's amazing. Then the pitch is kind of cool because it's like bounty hunters and it's like Judge Dredd, but you can actually root for the main character. Like that's really cool. But I read 40 pages or so of this last night just to get a head start to make sure that I was making a good choice here. And boy, oh boy, is this book fun. Like it's 8 pages of pulpy Western sci-fi without a care in the world about explaining anything other than what's actually happening. And it's like every time something weird happens, there's a mutant explanation for it. And it's got that thing that I think works only in super short form comics where you don't really have to explain anything. Things can just kind of happen and you as the reader just roll with it because you know that this is a super short story. And yeah, I'm really excited to get back to this. Like there's 388 pages in the first Case Files or the first collection. I don't remember what they called it exactly. And I'm really excited. Like the artwork in this is unbelievably good. It's again, it comes back to that thing we've talked about when we talked about Judge Dredd in 2000 AD in general. I can't believe the quality of comic art that we get that's coming out on like a weekly basis from these creators, right? And we are super impressed every week when this happens in Shonen Jump and a lot of other manga titles, but man, oh man, the detail in this book alone, it's very reminiscent of some of the Judge Dredd stuff that I read that just floored me. And so I'm very excited to dig into this. And as I said last week on the show, I'm taking any and all recommendations via the IRCB email. That's ircbpodcast@gmail.com. And you can send me any recommendations, give me a reason, give me one, give me many, but just know that I'll be giving honest reviews of anything. So if I don't like something, I'm going to tell you. Anyway, so the runner-up here for this week, though, I will say before I round out, before we jump into the second half of the show, Immortal Sergeant #1 is also coming out this week from Joe Kelly and Ken Nimura, the same team who brought us I Kill Giants. I'm very excited to see what they have next. That's going to be cool. But anyways, Strontium Dog, what a blast. Let's take a quick break though. And when we come back, we're going to talk about our Goodreads Book of the Month comic book. It's very, very, very good. Nuclear Winter Volume 1. We'll be back in just a second. One day while combing the beach, Amber and Alana discovered a pair of beautiful medallions. What happened next changed their lives forever. The Santos Sisters comic book will have you laughing from cover to cover as they fight crime, date dumb dudes, and just deal with everyday life as young women in the world. The Santos Sister is printed in Buffalo Grove, Illinois with a 4-color web press, a decadent newsprint just like your dad's comic books. The style of the Santos Sisters is similar to an old Archie comic, but with a modern vibe that resonates with today's audience. The Comics Journal loved the first issue, calling it a highly entertaining comic, and Paul Jasley of the I Read Comic Book podcast said, "I enjoyed the hell out of it." The Santos Sisters is available now, and don't miss out. Ask your favorite comic book retailer to add it to your pull list today, or find it online at santossisters.com. For our show this week, we are talking about the Goodreads Book of the Month as picked by our 2022 Reading Challenge winners. I want to say thank you to everyone out there who participated in the Reading Challenge last year. There was an incredible number of books, an incredible variety of books. And for those of you that went out there and finished the Reading Challenge, you are the top tier wonderful heroes. We really appreciate you going through everything. We put together a thread on Goodreads and folks voted and discussed and came up with one book that they thought that we should read for this show, and that is Nuclear Winter Volume 1 by Cab. I do want to say, moving forward for the Goodreads Book of the Month stuff that we're going to be doing, if you've been paying attention on our Goodreads, you've noticed that we changed the format there. For this year, we're changing the format of how we approach that for the show, but we're going to talk more about that next week on the annual, so just wanted to give you a heads up there. But anyways, for the format for today's episode, Kait, Nick, and I all picked 3 different things we wanted to talk about in this book. So we're going to just bounce around the table and talk about those different points and then wrap things up and hopefully give a little bit of a rating or what we thought about this book if we want to continue, so on and so forth. I asked those questions to wrap things up. So to get started, Kait, could you read the nice little summary that you wrote up for this book?
St. John, Montreal is experiencing perpetual winter after an accident at the local nuclear power plant. Feet of snow are dropped every few days during storms that also drop massive ice crystals. The locals exhibit mutations like extra limbs, extra eyes, and non-natural skin and hair colors. Flavie works as a courier using a snowmobile to deliver orders from shops to customers. She gets trapped with the local hottie Marco outside during a storm. While they're together, Flavia has to use her superhuman strength to defend a mutant raccoon baby. When she gets Marco back home to his party house, Flavia has a fight with Marco's rude girlfriend who spontaneously develops feathers and bird features. Flavia's hands overheat and start to blister just as a giant ice crystal lands on Bird Girl and ends the fight. The story ends with Flavie, Marco, and Flavie's best friend Leonie going out to brunch.
For the record, full spoilers, Kait gave a very nice summary there of the book, but we are going to be going over everything that happened in this volume, so hopefully you've read it by the time you've got to this point in the episode. And I guess to get things started, let me talk with my first point here, which is, Canada. Not only is this book in Canada, but it's snowing even more. That's all I could think of was just like, yikes. Because whenever we think about Canada, all we think about is snow. Sorry to our Canadian listeners out there. We know that you're out there. We appreciate you. But boy, this book felt like extra Canadian to me, like some things are in French. There's extra snow. People are eating poutine left and right. I did find it pretty funny that there was a conversation early in the book that was just like, hey, if you come out and have a chat with me, I'll buy you some poutine. And that was like an immediate, okay, let's go do this. I don't know. I thought that there was maybe some locale references that maybe I didn't get, some little bits and pieces here that were extra Canadian. So maybe they weren't something that I could totally get. And I believe someone said in their notes, this book was translated. Was this book originally in French?
The signs are all in French, so I have to imagine that that's the case.
Okay. Or maybe, I mean, it is a thing having been to Canada a couple of times. I do know that a lot of things are written in French intentionally because like there is 2 major languages in the country. So yeah, I wasn't sure about that, but it did feel extra Canadian. I don't know if you guys got that feeling at all.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I guess, Kait, what's your first point then?
My first point is maybe kind of a bummer.
Okay.
I've read this book before a couple of times, and I remember it as this cute, quirky slice of life, like survivalist story, kind of a mix of genres. But the first few pages shows Flavie in what I think is an unhappy romantic relationship, or at least an unhappy roommate relationship. And the first time we meet Marco in the cafe, he also comes off as kind of a jerk. He like agrees with the waiter that Flavie's being rude or something like that. And then it turns out that Marco is dating this person who's also not nice. So either I didn't remember this story very well, and these relationships either end or they improve over the course of the next 2 volumes, or I just completely misremembered the story. So like, let's pause the episode and let me go read those books right now.
That's good.
Okay, cool.
But also, maybe like Flavie being the point of view character for this story, maybe she's just not a reliable narrator. And like, considering that this is kind of like a mostly like kind of cutesy book, it's kind of cool to think that they're using a literary device like an unreliable narrator in this cute little story.
Sure. Yeah, I did notice it's weird again, and I think this is, you probably should read the rest of the story, Mike, is the answer to this question. But I was like, what happened to that guy?
Yeah, he never comes up again.
He never comes back, you know? It's really interesting. I mean, and it's funny, I couldn't tell if they were in a relationship or if they were just roommates. In my head, I was like, that's her brother. I don't know why, but like the way that I think they were written together is
weird.
that maybe they were brother and sister. And I don't know. I have to read the rest of the series probably, but I did find it funny that they were both doing something that had to do with like riding a snowmobile or like being out in the snow. And maybe that's what everybody does in the nuclear winter future. Because like, this is a point that I'll probably get to later, but like there is a lot of like questions that as soon as you start to scratch away the surface a little bit, you go, whoa, this is a bit darker than maybe this book's overall appeal or like feeling kind of gives off, right? Because it does feel like a really cutesy book, but underneath the surface, there's like a lot of complex stuff going on, and maybe some stuff we don't want to focus on, or maybe the author didn't want to focus on, like, you know, nuclear fallout and things like that, and instead it kind of gets twisted into kind of this like cutesy, oh, there's mutant people, and some people have powers, and some people are growing an extra arm out of their head. It's very reminiscent of the mutants in the Strontium Dogs that I was reading, but with a cuter design overall. I don't know, Nick, what did you get any feelings like that from this book?
Yeah, I mean, that kind of goes a little hand in hand with like my first point, which is that this book is I appreciate the fact that it sort of defies sort of like genre and setting expectations. I think a lot of slice of life books tend to be set in a fairly conventional contemporary setting. It, you know, something that feels like an episode of Friends. Everybody lives in the city and is, you know, living together in an apartment that they really shouldn't conceivably be able to afford, and everybody gets along, and and that's not to say that there isn't slice of life that isn't that, but it sort of feels like that's where a lot of it tends to go. And then on the flip side of that, I think most post-apocalyptic narratives tend to end up being basically a la, you know, Mad Max or Fallout, some sort of desert wasteland resource war over ammo or fuel or food or all three. And so to see something that basically smashes the two together and then basically defies a lot of the typical tropes and stereotypes surrounding the two. I think that that's really interesting, and to some people they would probably say that it's a mashup that really probably shouldn't work.
Hmm.
As you said, I think that they explore some of the implications of that without getting too. I think the author knows when to get away from the, I guess, the hard science or whatever. Like, obviously,
Hmm.
if you have
Hmm.
nuclear fallout, there's going to be, a lot of radiation that's discussed somewhat in the book, and then of course you're going to end up with mutations. I think most of them are going to be like terrible and disfiguring people in ways that are not what I would consider resulting in powers or, it's like if most of the things that whatever, if all of the superhero stories, it's like, oh, what is it? This thing of nuclear waste fell on me and now I can fly. Well, that's
Yeah,
probably not the sort of mutation that would happen in real life, but
sure.
so I appreciate that this book does take the more, I guess, upbeat route of being like, oh, people now have powers or extra eyes or whatever. So it's interesting to see the author kind of walk that line between like this is sort of the stuff that would happen following nuclear fallout, and then maybe having some fun with it, or which is a weird thing to say about nuclear fallout,
Sure,
but
sure.
um, just being more imaginative, right,
Yeah.
about the implications. So I found that really interesting to sort of have that genre setting mashup take place. Um,
Yeah, yeah, this definitely gets to like my second question here, right? Or my second point, which is I was trying not to ask too many questions about this book, right? Because again, like
mhm.
you start to scratch away at some of the surface and becomes really grim, and I don't want this to be like the focus of the discussion of the book, right? Because I do think when you allow yourself that suspension of disbelief, right? Because that's the key here, is to take that suspension of disbelief and go, okay, if we don't think about this too hard, like this narrative is actually really fun, right? You take this extreme circumstance that this character's in, where there's constant snow and the worry of not being able to navigate and people being cold, but people still needing things. And so courier services being like a huge deal, like Flavie drives around on a snowmobile and she delivers things for people. And like, is that not a thing that happens today? Because it 100% is, right? Like, how often are delivery services used nowadays for people, whether that's groceries or just like one-off coffees and a donut? The fact that Flavia is still working this job where she has to go pick up bagels for someone and then bring them back, and then someone being mad this is what they wanted. Like, there's this extreme level of privilege that is still exists in the story, but the way that this story kind of conveys it, it seems that everybody's using this thing to the point where there need swaths of couriers and people doing delivery services because so few people want to go outside of their houses. Like years have passed since this nuclear winter has started, and so the world has adapted, and only the choice few are able to just stay in their homes all the time, especially if you live in the whatever area they called it, which seemed to be like the fancier side of the city. Using these courier services like the norm, and there are plenty of people, it seems, that work in these courier services because of this winter thing. Not to mention what her roommate or boyfriend or brother, whichever that person was, the snow clearing services, which almost seemed pointless because despite the snow clearing services, there was snow everywhere on every road. So I did try not to dig too deep on this and just try to enjoy the story for what it was on the surface, because otherwise you run into this like, oh, this book is actually really dark when you start to think about it, like this overanalyzation of a story that I think is supposed to be as lighthearted as a story like this can be, given the style that it shows off, and just the overall just like vibe that I got from this book. I don't know, were you guys able to suspend that disbelief for this book?
Yeah, there was a couple of points where like they were putting gas into the snowmobile and I was like, can the gas trucks get here? But like
Yeah.
I
Don't think about it too
I
much,
did.
Kate.
I
Don't
did. I
ruin
was
this
like,
book, Kate.
hang on, just stop, just read the story.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, yeah, I think what I took away from that is that there's a surprising amount of job creation that comes along with nuclear fallout, and I think you know, I was like, you know, there's something there. Um, But yeah, if you start asking about like, well, how is the government operating, and is this happening on a national level, and what's it like in the rest of the world,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, if you start picking at that, it can be a little bit, I think it can be distracting. But I will say that I think the author does attempt to, answer some of those questions, and whether it's about, how things are still functioning, or whether it's about why some of the meteorological, weather related, phenomena is occurring.
Mm-hmm.
We find out that Flavie used to, I think she was in school for meteorology, or,
Mm-hmm.
or something along those lines, and so the author uses that as a little clever way to inject some of those, weather phenomena, stuff into the story.
Mm-hmm.
So I appreciate that, like, the author didn't just put blinders on and just be like, don't ask any of those things. Like,
Mm-hmm.
don't, these are just some, you know people having fun, and having a little adversity here and there, maybe a little unconventional adversity, but like, massive snowflakes. But yeah, I thought the author did try to actually address some of that.
Yeah.
So
Okay, what was your second point?
I really enjoyed the animal designs in this area. Like, we only
Oh
see the
yeah.
little raccoon, the little, like, that we see the little raccoon, but then later we see its parent, and it's a giant raccoon, like truly
Yeah.
massive. Um,
Yeah.
but then also at the back of the book, there's some rear matter showing animal designs for other animals, and there's like this two-headed seagull that looks absolutely unhinged.
Mm-hmm.
There are these four-armed squirrels that look kind of rabid, and so I know that I've read the next two volumes, but I don't remember if we see more of these animals. I definitely hope that we
Sure.
do, because they're
Sure.
very, very creative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really liked the cartoonish design of like everything. Really, like the humans, the regular folks. I mean, like we're fine. Like Flavie, it has this mutation, and but so she doesn't actually look, but she doesn't look like some of the other people that have like an extra mouth, or like a cyclops eye, or like the guy who's sitting outside. There's like a homeless guy who's like got this big old beard. He looks like the Scruffaluffagus from Sesame Street, right? And I love the way that the cab was able to just create all of these kind of cartoonish fun things that feel very much like a Nickelodeon show. If you were to say like, oh, there's all these mutants and blah blah blah, and if we ignore like the ramifications of real life, because we've all seen the TV show Chernobyl and we know how awful it is when like nuclear fallout happens. But then you go with this cartoonish idea of like, and then everyone kind of moved on with their lives. Like, right, this bad thing happened, and now we all have to live with this life. And like from the animals to the people to the way that people adapted, there was just like this kind of fun, vibrant, cartoonish thing that allowed you to just immerse yourself in this fun world that they had created. And seeing it with the animals and then seeing it with some of the other people was really fun. I thought that was great. Nick, what about you? What's your second point here?
yeah, I think the other thing I want to discuss is something you got at a little bit earlier, which is the translation. The book doesn't appear to have had a separate person handling it,
Mm-hmm,
but
mm-hmm,
the credits page does credit Carolyn Yates, quote, for Canadian consultation on the English translation.
mm,
So, and as Mike pointed out, this book is quite Canadian, or Canadian with an E at the end instead of an A. That was a joke in my notes that really just doesn't translate well. But everyone, I'll send everyone my notes, and you can laugh at that and think,
yeah.
oh, that was
Another
that was
plug for the
quite good.
Patreon. If you're at the $5 tier or
Yeah,
above, you can get access to
paywall
our.
this shit.
You can.
Paywall this shit.
I mean, we have raw access to our show notes. Is all I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah. So
Raw
if you
access.
wanted
That's
a
gross.
brief,
Um,
yeah. But yes, there's a lot of Canadian stuff in this book, which is a little disorienting at times. I learned from this book that whippets aren't actually or aren't just the recreational abuse of nitrous oxide,
yeah.
or a dog breed.
I
They're also, was it a cookie?
all I could think of was It's Always Sunny when Charlie and Mac just do whippets and then drive a car into a wall. and think that they can jump out of the car before it hits the wall and not get hurt. Yeah, they're cookies, apparently.
Yeah, they're cookies. Also, I learned that apparently someone thought it would be cute to extend the all dressed moniker from chips to uh, bagels. And I have to say bagels because if I say it like I normally do, which is bagels,
Mhm.
someone is going to lose their fucking mind.
Come for
So
him. Come for Nick in the
yeah,
comments.
please. But why are they all dressed bagels? It's an everything bagel.
I think that's a
Um,
New York East Coast thing. I don't know if they call them everything bagels all over the world.
really?
Maybe. I don't know. I think this is one of those very special Canadian things, is my guess.
I think so. I think so. Also, for any of you out there who haven't tried all dressed chips, you should. I know they were selling them in the US for a while. I don't know if they still are, but so good. They're so good. Uh, so get on that.
Nick, are you saying that we're going to have another snack episode and it's going to just be me and you eating these all dressed chips?
I mean, it might be.
Okay.
It might be just a big bag of all dressed chips. They're so good. It's like a ketchupy flavor, but it's like a ketchupy plus barbecuey.
Well,
Uh,
but then maybe that's why they're called all dressed bagels, because they use this flavoring on the bagel instead of like an everything bagel, which has like poppy seed and sesame and garlic flakes and all that stuff. Now my mouth is watering because I'm hungry, apparently.
I thought that
I
I
think
thought
it's
Mark
they mention the ingredients of an everything bagel
Okay.
when discussing the all dressed bagel, and I hate having to keep say bagel because I keep having to think about it as I say it.
Is that what you were going to say, Kate?
I thought that Marco's girlfriend at one point was like, I wanted to have raisins, but not onions or something like that. So I feel
Oh,
like it's
right.
actually
That's right.
toppings.
Okay, so it's an everything bagel. All right, listen, I'm going to get on the phone with this cab creator and ask them what the hell they meant by all. Or, you know what, if you're from Canada, send us an email at ircbpodcast@gmail.com and let us know what an all dressed bagel is. Send us a picture. Maybe
Yes.
mail me some all dressed bagels. And I'll be
Yes.
the decider here, okay?
Yeah, I'm the one who decides. Yeah, so there's definitely references to that. There's references to like Saint Jean Baptiste Day, which I guess is a holiday that's celebrated by French Canadians. Again, I guess my point about all of this is that overall it sounds like I'm annoyed by it, but actually I I guess this point is one I make consistently. It sounds like I'm annoyed by this, but I actually appreciate that the book wasn't Americanized in terms of setting or language or character names. And I also like, and this is something you see quite a good amount in other translated books, is that the editorial team or the translator or the writer or a combination is like concerned that even once the book is translated, there are cultural references or national references that just won't make sense. And so the book just gets cluttered with all of these little asterisks or editor's notes or little captions off on the side. And it just gets filled with all these little notes and it just gets distracting.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually prefer when a book is maybe there's a note here or there, but otherwise, like just Google it, just Google it. Um, and
Nick, I'm gonna
there are
I'm gonna
things that
find an episode where you definitely said I don't want to have to Google things in order to read my
I'm
comic.
sure,
I know that it
yeah,
exists.
there are probably multiple that exist.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, what is human existence if not contradictory? I already talked about how fickle people were at the beginning of the show about snow in Michigan.
Right,
So
right.
I think I've already made my point in this episode. But I just like that. Like just Google it. It's not hard. And I think the bottom line with this book is that for the moments and times when you are a little confused or aren't sure what you're dealing with, most of us have the ability to, understand context clues.
Hmm.
And the fact that this is a comic means you also have a visual element that really makes it not that hard to look at something and go, okay, I get what's going on.
Yeah, I despite not knowing all the references, right? Like I still didn't feel like I wasn't able to follow the story because of that. So I totally agree there.
Right, like, none of these things were plot crucial,
Right,
right?
right.
Like, none of these things were like, "Well, if only I knew what happened on Saint Jean Baptiste Day, then the whole
Yeah.
book would suddenly like, the puzzle pieces would fall into place."
Right,
Like,
right.
no, it's 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 nothing like that.
Yeah.
So I just appreciate it being Canadian, and on top of that, being, I think, quite French
Yeah.
Canadian, in that regard, so
Cool. Well, my third point was, I think, something we've already covered like ad nauseum at this point, which is, the darkness behind everything in this book. We don't need to get into it because I think it's there if we want to pick at it, but I don't think that was the point of this book. So I guess, Kait, what was your third point here with this book?
I really enjoy the build up to learning about Flavy's mutation because that
Yeah.
starts really early in the story. Like we get hints
Hmm.
of it here and there. We see that she's really strong. We see that she eats like a lot of food.
Right. Something that
um,
she's minorly embarrassed about, right?
yeah, she doesn't really want to talk about it. And then that build up pays off at the end of the book when we have this fight at the end. But then we also get the sense that we haven't seen all of it yet. Like I mentioned, that her hands start getting really hot and start to blister, but it gets stopped. Like somebody intervenes and like treats her hands. So
Hmm. Hmm.
we get this sense that there's more to that. And
Right.
and luckily we have more to this story to read.
Right.
can I just say I really appreciate how Kate has read all of this multiple times and does a really good job of pretending that she actually hasn't read the rest of this book. Whereas, like, if it's me, I'm like, hey, maybe this happens in volume 2, maybe it doesn't. And it's like something so utterly specific that of course it
Right.
happens.
Right.
Like, it's like maybe in volume 2 he is able to have ice powers.
Yeah.
It's like, well, thanks,
Yeah.
though.
No,
Yeah.
I did like the build up. I thought that, we have done everything but talk about what happens in this book, which is fine. But I do appreciate that there is a slow progression of like her slowly starting to accept her mutant power, and then as that happens, she starts to slowly accept just overall like who she is and like where she is in the world, I think. Especially when it comes to dealing with the hot guy and she has to use her hands to touch his face because he's so cold. Like, this is totally something that my wife Kelly, like, she constantly goes like goofy over because she loves those moments of just like they shouldn't be together but now they are, and it's like, oh my gosh, you know what, I secretly love that stuff too. But it was funny, the way that they use that element of her mutation to be like, oh, she has to warm him, she has to put her hands on his face or on his hands, and like, oh, they would never have held hands otherwise. It's little cute moments like that like draw this or make this story like very cutesy and fun at the same time, while also handling these, oh no, now she has to fight this giant monster and she has to pick up a truck and throw it at this guy, because Hulk smash, or Flavi smash. I thought that was fun. Totally. I think that like it really, really works. And it, like you said, Kate, it does pay off in a way that it feels like it's earned. And of course the book ends on a nice cliffhanger to see like where's this story going to go, which I thought was really nice too. Like, definitely made me want to read the second volume. And I think someone in the Discord was asking about like how long this series was, and it's only a couple of volumes, right?
Yeah, and all the books are pretty short. Like they could be collected
Yeah.
into one slightly larger volume.
Hmm. But yeah, this is kind of one of those perfect examples, I think, of something we've talked about on the show many times, of like what's better, a 6-issue single series or 6-issue miniseries, or like a graphic novel, or like a series of graphic novels, and I think Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips's Reckless is an example of graphic novels that can work, but of course that only works because they're established creators, I think. Whereas this book, by Cab, maybe not a hugely success or hugely like known creator, but nonetheless, if you put this book in my hands, I want to read the next 2 or 3 volumes, and I'd be happy to wait for another volume rather than waiting for 24 pages. I'd rather get 100 pages at a time and kind of like push this book out, every couple of months, which is pretty cool. So yeah. Nick, I guess what's your last point here to wrap this episode up?
Yeah, I think for me, just generally speaking, that's something we've kind of already gotten at a little bit. Just I really do appreciate the ambitious world building here. And something Kate sort of got at a little bit is that there is just a ridiculously huge behind the scenes section in the back. There's so much concept art, just an insane amount of concept art, and yeah, there's just a lot to look at, and I think it's sort of gets at the fact that this book is just so detail oriented. Like, as I was reading the book, I was really surprised, especially considering how dense some of the art was, especially even for a more cartoony style, that all of the characters do look distinctively different.
Mm-hmm.
Even the extras in the background, even like the 3 or 4 like characters that are at the party at Marco's house, like everybody looks really distinctively different from one another. You're not dealing with issues of like same face or whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And again, it's a stereotype, but I think for more slice of life books, for less like intense and like realistic books, I think people expect a looser, less detailed art style. And I think this book is just, there's a lot to pick up on from context clues or signs in the background,
Yeah.
or I caught myself like reading a lot of the street signs or shop
Yeah.
signs, or looking at some of like the little creatures in the nature scenes or whatever. There's just a lot to pick up on, and there's just a lot of care that went into that sometimes when you look at pieces of work that exist in these genres, it's just there's not as much there. And I think just some of that is just the fact that given the setting, you needed some world building. So
Yeah. Well, I guess to wrap things up here, I did have like a couple small things that I wanted to call out, just like little bits. I did love that Flavi called her snowmobile a skidoo a couple times. Like, it's not, but it also is, and I love that. I thought that was cute. I hated that even in a dystopian future that there are hipsters somehow. Like
Right.
parties where people are overly pretentious and somebody's getting tired of them. And the giant snowflakes, like Flavi at one point, she's like,
Yes.
oh no, this storm is about to like maximize or whatever she said, or hit critical mass. And she dives under a house with the love interest. And then all of a sudden these massive snowflakes fall to the ground made out of ice. I thought that was a fun little thing. Like, it's dangerous, but it's also super cute. And it happens a couple times in the volumes. And I thought that was pretty cool. So yeah, I don't know if you guys had any little odds or ends or anything that you wanted to call out, but I thought those were cute little moments. I'm seeing shaking heads, so I think that's where we're gonna wrap up the episode. But yeah, I appreciate you guys reading this book, Nuclear Winter Volume 1. It was a lot of fun. Thank you to the folks again on Goodreads for picking this book as the book that we're going to read. We're going to talk more, I think, next week, like I said, about how we're going to be handling Goodreads books of the month and themes and stuff like that moving forward. So look forward to checking that out. That is January 22nd at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard. Make sure that you can get there. Join us on YouTube. Join us on Twitch. We're not going to be broadcasting this on Discord, so you got to be there to listen to the episode and watch and see our beautiful faces. It's going to be me and Paul and Kait and Danny. It's going to be a blast. I'm really, really looking forward to it. Yeah, I guess like there's going to be a ton of other stuff that's happening too that during the episode, or some stuff we'll see. Make sure to send us an email at ircbpodcast@gmail.com to tell us your favorite comics that you read last year. Anything you want to send us, comments, questions, we will answer them. We will get to it. It's going to be fun. And as always, you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Discord, and Goodreads. All those links are going to be in the show notes. And I want to say shout out to Renee and Danny and Kait for kicking ass on our TikTok and Instagram and YouTube recently. We've been trying to post a lot more stuff there, so make sure you follow us on those channels to get all of our comic hauls and comic reviews that we're doing that aren't on the show. We've been posting all that stuff on those channels. Support us on Patreon at patreon.com/IRCB podcast. Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all of our music. Xander flies across the barriers of space and time, seeking a bright new dawn. I think I said that last week, but I didn't write a new update, and so he's still doing that. He's still trying to find a bright new dawn. Thank you to Nick and Kait for joining me on this episode. Thank you to everyone in Discord for hanging out with us today. If you got this far in the episode, thank you to you, the dear listener. You are what makes this show possible, and we thank you so much. And until next time, comics are good, and so are you.